The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
The income tax deadline is fast approaching. A lot of wealth in this country, however, is not derived from income and so is not subject to taxation in the same way. Should it be? We'll debate that tonight. Then, Generation Squeeze founder Paul Kershaw makes the case that baby boomers should not be leaving their tax liabilities to their children. It's Wednesday, April 26th, and that's next on The Agenda. This year's federal budget promised that Canada is, quote, raising taxes on the wealthiest 1% to cut taxes for the middle class. It also introduced some luxury taxes and pointed to action on so-called shell companies that better off people can use to shelter money. Are such moves enough to collect more and make a fairer tax system? Or is it, as some argue, time for a wealth tax in this country? Let's ask. In the nation's capital, Tyler Meredith. He is co-founder of Meredith Bosencool Policy Advisors and a senior fellow at the Maytree Foundation. And here in our studio, Allison Christians, professor of tax law at McGill University and the author of Tax Cooperation in an Unjust World. Birute Lukshanate is here. She's a lawyer and principal at Portfolio Estate Law. Anne Graham Moffat, senior fellow at the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the University of Toronto. And it's great to have you three here with us. You two, again, you in person for the first time?
Yeah, that's right.
You for the first time ever on the program
That's
at all.
right.
Beautiful. And Tyler, good to have you on the show again from the nation's capital. Paul Kershaw from Generation Squeeze, who is on this program immediately after this conversation, and he's going to get us off to a start here thinking about the question of what constitutes wealth. Sheldon, if you would.
We've done some polling recently where we were trying to probe Canadians' understanding of who's economically at risk, who's affluent. And we started with a scenario of, imagine a widow with an income of just $25,000, has her barely over the guaranteed income supplement living, so really close to low income. Rich or poor? Oh, that sounds poor. She lives in a home that she owns outright, and it's worth $1 million. People were not so sure now. Imagine the home's $2 million, which is not uncommon in the Toronto area or Hamilton area. And like, oh no, that person's rich. Then we swap it around and say, imagine a young lawyer making $200,000. It puts them in the top few percent of income earners in this country. Oh, definitely affluent. They're renting. And suddenly like, oh no, that person is less affluent than the widow with 25 grand who owns outright a home worth $2 million. I think we need to be recognizing that an older demographic might not view itself as Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk, but the relative affluence and security that comes with secure housing is something that a younger demographic is feeling really crowded out of, and they're being jeopardized by it.
Paul will have more to say about this later in the program when he's coming up as a guest after this discussion. But he raises an interesting question of what constitutes wealth in this country, and therefore how do we design a tax system accordingly. All right. You've heard what he had to say.
Yeah.
How do you react?
Well, I think we always start with the fundamentals, right? You know, the tax system has to be fair in order for people to accept it and to cooperate with it. And so anytime there's a sense that things are not fair or they're getting less fair, I think people start saying, well, we need to fix it. And often people want to start by fixing it with something new, like a wealth tax, instead of fixing the system that we have. So, you know, I've said this before on the program, I think we often have to go back to the fundamentals and look at our income tax system the way that it works now and start thinking about what we could improve with the system we have before we start layering on top.
Tyler, what does that comment say to you about what constitutes wealth in this country?
Well, look, I think it is realistic for people to know that, wealth has actually improved quite a bit over the course of the last 15 years. People have actually gotten richer. And that's true in all groups for the most part, except the very poorest in our society. But the old adage, you're richer than you think, is actually true. And in fact, wealth inequality has actually improved even post-pandemic. in the last 3 or 4 years, something that I think would be shocking to a lot of people. But I think this goes to a basic question of, do people feel like the economy is working for them? And a great example of that, so like Graham, I also teach at the University of Toronto, and students in my class, we were recently talking about tax issues, and when they talked about tax, they said to themselves, I don't feel like I'm going to get ahead, and I also don't feel like I'm going to get ahead because I don't know that I'm going to be able to buy a house. And so I don't know that that translates into we have to therefore change the tax system to address that problem, but we have to be able to show people that they are able to get ahead in society.
Okay, Birute, how do you react to what you just heard from Paul and the rest?
Well, I will tell you that I work with older clients who do estate planning work, and they are very dismayed at the already high level of taxation. And they feel that the wealth that they have accumulated throughout their lives is due to the very frugal lifestyle that they pursued that is not really comparable to the lifestyle of the current younger generations that may not be able to afford to buy a home, for example. And also have observed that when younger people inherit an estate, they are not necessarily very enthusiastic about saving that house of the family or buying a house with inherited assets. Rather, they would like to invest that money in something that brings enjoyment on a daily basis, or perhaps luxury purchases.
So the frugality of the previous generation may not be echoed in this generation.
That is my observation.
That is, okay. Graham, how do you react?
So, to go a little further on Paul's point, there's a question of intergenerational fairness here. About an incredible amount of wealth generated by especially the housing market in Canada, and people really struggling to feel like they're able to build that kind of nest egg in a younger generation. Now, I'm sure many of Birute's clients are slightly older than the baby boomer generation, but I don't think we would call the baby boomer generation particularly frugal in historical terms. We do have a problem of how we're going to pay for all of the social services that we have come to take for granted and that we appreciate as a society. And how we're going to pay for those is really the major question in intergenerational fairness with taxation. Whether we're going to tax the incomes of workers in the future and increase those taxes, or whether we can find a way to have the oldest and wealthiest members of our society pay a greater share of the services they're consuming, which tend to increase as they age because the cost of healthcare as you age increases.
For sure. Allison, do you think, given I think one of the things that emerges from Paul's comment is that it is a little trickier to figure out who's wealthy in this country and who isn't. Having said that, do we need a wealth tax in this country in order to pay for all the things that everybody says they want?
Right. So, okay, everybody thinks everybody else is wealthy and they are themselves not wealthy. Right. And everybody always thinks I'm paying a very high amount of tax and I don't want to pay more tax. So we have to start from that proposition that I think people don't actually know where they stand. And I think it's correct to say it's hard to determine whether this person is more wealthy than that person unless you take as a principle of the tax system that we should be taxing on the basis of ability to pay. And that's embedded in the income tax.
Yeah, we do that already.
Yeah, we do that. And so we think about wealth tax. When you say wealth tax, I say, okay, I'm not opposed to a wealth tax, but what do you mean? Like, what are we going to tax? So when you say wealth tax, you mean, would you like to tax the value of everyone's home every year? Well, the property taxes already do that, right? So are you adding on top of that? And is that means tested? Is there an ability to pay component to that? I think that you have to start asking those hard questions. And, it's just much easier to say, oh, you just need a wealth tax and let's just get more out of, some obscure, abstract pool of people that most definitely does not include me. I don't want to pay more tax.
So the devil is definitely in the details, and the details are tricky here.
They're always tricky, and they're always based on that fundamental question of when you start talking about what is fair, you have to interrogate that question. You can't just assume we know what is fair.
What's your reaction to a wealth tax?
Well, I recently read a study that looked at the history of the wealth tax in Europe. So currently, there are still 4 countries in Europe that levy the wealth tax. 3 of them on the global assets of a resident, which are in Norway, Spain, and Switzerland. And in Norway and Switzerland, these taxes have been levied since the 19th century. Now, in 1996, there were actually 12 countries that levied this tax. And they repealed this tax because it did not deliver the economic results and the tax objectives of the countries.
It didn't bring in the money they expected.
So it brings in a very small fraction of the budget of those countries, and it actually encourages to immigration, capital flight, very difficult assessment processes, because if you levied this tax in its purest form, you would have to value the value of the assets. They would have to be levied on the global estate of a person. So where assets are located in other countries, you would have to tax those assets as well. But how do you properly assess the value?
So,
do you require an annual evaluation?
Too complicated then.
It's very complicated. It may be a good idea, but it definitely needs further assessment.
Tyler, how about you? You for a wealth tax?
No, at least not in the form that is described often by, say, Senator Warren, and not because it's not pointing at an important problem, which is that wealth has gone up significantly, particularly in the top income and wealth categories over time, notwithstanding what happened in the pandemic. But just because I just think it's a huge waste of time. It's going to take 5 years to build the administrative capacities to be able to measure and tax those things. And it's very easy to move money around. I mean, a lot of liquid asset is just cash, or it's even illiquid assets, which is very hard to measure. And so why would we spend all of this time and effort to try to go after a very particular form of inequality in our society when there are other simpler backdoor ways to go at the same issue, which could be either changing how we look at income or even just better enforcing the rules that we have. We actually lose a fair bit of tax just by simply having so many loopholes in our tax system.
We'll look through the back door a little later in our discussion here, but Graham, I mean, that is part of the problem here, right? A wealth tax sounds like a neat idea, a neat populist, easy to get money idea, but the devil in the details is so tricky and it would take a long time to figure out.
There's a big, huge chasm between rhetoric and reality, and the political rhetoric and the reality of imposing a wealth tax. I think we're all in agreement that a wealth tax is impractical, at least on this panel. Everyone who's looked at it, most tax policy experts who've looked at this will say, okay, well, most countries are abandoning their wealth taxes. We have fewer countries with wealth taxes now than we did 10 years ago and 10 years before that. The practical realities of implementing a wealth tax, measuring everyone's assets, and forcing, basically asking everyone what they own all of the time, and to have the government have that information is not something everyone's comfortable with. There are ways of doing this, though, that are much more practical and don't impose the kinds of undue burdens on people who may have, relatively high wealth, like a $2 million home, and a relatively modest income. And that is that when someone's estate is transferred, when they die, and their estate passes to a relative or to, someone else, they do have to assess and measure all of those assets. So we do give a value to the estate. And at that point, it can be taxed. Those are inheritance taxes. Canada stands out in the OECD as for not having an inheritance tax. Most countries have an inheritance tax. In most countries in the OECD, it brings in about 0.5% of total taxes. And in places like Japan and Korea, it brings in about 1.5% of overall taxes.
Do you like that as an idea?
It's certainly a better idea than a wealth tax. I think it's probably less painful to pay a tax when you're dead than when you're alive.
Okay. Yes. Tyler, what do you think of the inheritance tax idea?
Well, we do actually have elements of an inheritance tax already, right? Because we have this rule called deemed disposition in the tax system. What deemed disposition in the tax system means is that when you die, if you have assets that are held in, let's say, stocks and bonds or ETFs, they will automatically be deemed as being sold to, through the estate. And so capital gains, if it's not in a tax-sheltered account, will have to be paid at that point in time. And income will have to be paid as though it has been proceeds to the estate. So we already kind of have some version of an estate tax. It's just making sure that you pay tax at the time that the income comes out. The issue that what we don't capture is there are some elements of things that just transfer, right? That aren't included in what we would consider to be taxable. And there, I think there's a question of should they be in or should they be out. There are ways you could actually, if you wanted to expand an estate tax, I mean, you could basically use the existing system of probate fees as a way to potentially broaden that out into a version of an estate tax that wouldn't have the burden of complexity of introducing a whole new system as we would if we had to introduce a wealth tax.
What about you, Allison? Inheritance or estate taxes? Better way to go?
Yeah. So we have, when you die, it's like you sold everything for tax purposes. So I don't agree that we don't have an inheritance tax. We do. We have an estate tax in that sense. I think the key is that you can do intervals, you can do transfers during your lifetime, you can do planning during your lifetime to minimize your taxes. And I think most Canadians probably don't understand exactly the extent to which people who have means are able to plan their way out of paying taxes. And again, I think that feeds into this narrative, right? That, well, we need more taxes from the wealthy. Well, are we getting taxes from the wealthy? Like, how are we getting taxes from the wealthy? And if there's a chasm, the chasm is that, well, we have actually made a lot of exceptions in the income tax for capital, right? So your TFSA, your RRSP, your pension, all of these things are not going to be taxing capital. And so as the income tax focuses less on capital, it focuses more on employment and other kinds of income. And I think people who are on a fixed budget, but they have capital, and we think capital is not being taxed, then it's just creating that sense that there's just an unfairness. And why can't we fix that? There's lots of reasons that we might not be able to fix that. And I would say it starts with the politics rather than the policy.
Okay, before you get there, let's do a real estate follow-up here. Would a 1% tax on capital gains on point of sale of principal residences be a fair way to get more money out of the public?
Yeah, so actually, this is a great area where we do need to have a fix. Okay, so right now, if you sell your principal residence, your home, no matter how much you make, you're not going to have any tax. And this is unusual. In the U.S., there's an exemption up to $250,000 of gain per person. You know, why are we not thinking about ability to pay in that scenario? So, of course, for most people, there should be, there's a sense that we should protect the family home. We should protect the home is mostly where you live. It's not your investment, but it is for many people their primary investment. So maybe a 1% tax. I'm not sure. That's not really how I would do it personally. I would say you have an exempt amount, and above the exempt amount, that is capital gain that should be included in income. That would be in line with the United States and other countries. And I think then you would start at least to build into the income tax system, reinserting some excessive amounts of capital, and then maybe smoothing that out. But I always start from this place that it has to depend on ability to pay. You can't just throw taxes at everybody and say, we're just going to throw a percent at everyone and that's going to be fair. It's not necessarily going to be fair. People have different abilities to pay, and we do have different policy objectives always.
How do you like that idea?
I don't like the idea. I think that selling one's home already leads to large outlays. So, for example, you have to pay your real estate agent up to 5%. Then if you use that money to buy a new home, you pay land transfer tax. And then if you have 1% less of your original home proceeds, then maybe you're not able to afford a new home. I don't like this idea.
Okay, having said, I'm going to let you get back at that because you probably deserve a chance.
She doesn't like your idea. It's not my idea. She doesn't like it.
I think, can we bring this up now, Sheldon? Page 4, this graph. I mean, one of the reasons that governments are, I guess, considering the possibility of trying to do taxes related to real estate is look what's happened to wealth in this country, over the last 50 years or so, 45 years. And for those listening on podcast, we've got a graph up here. Net wealth in housing in Canada, your principal residence in 1977, didn't matter if you were under 45 or over 55, the amount of wealth you had in your home was basically about the same. If you go to present day, 58% of those over 55 have got lots of real estate money, right? Whereas those under 45, it's only 21%. So that's an issue. So what do we do about that?
Well, I go back to my original comment that I think it's the lifestyles of the younger generations that
they're going to love that
comment.
They're going to love that.
Them to and of course real estate. But why is real estate so expensive? That's another question. Why do we have $3 million homes, and then what's the other option? you know, a $1 million condo. Why isn't there anything in between to allow people to be able to afford something
That's a different
more
show.
affordable?
That's a different show.
I think this is not a
Steve?
this is not a straightforward answer.
Okay, Graham, it isn't, it isn't. What do you mean?
So part of the reason why we have homes that are $2 and $3 million is because that's a tax-exempt investment.
Right.
Right? So if you set the tax code up such that there are certain categories of capital investments that are tax-exempt and others that are not, the money's going to flow toward the ones that are tax-exempt, especially on disposition. And in that case in Canada, that's principally homes, principal residences. So what we're seeing is people willing to overinvest and overspend on homes because they know that they're going to get the money out without any tax. They know that home prices are going to go up over the long term, they always have, and they're going to get a profit without paying any tax on it.
So those conditions distort the situation somewhat.
So they do distort the prices of homes, of course. If we change the tax system, as you've suggested, whether it's through an estate tax or a property tax on the sale of principal residences, you're going to see a shift in the amount of money pouring into the residential real estate sector.
Got it. Tyler, where are you on all this?
Well, look, so I go back to what did my students at the University of Toronto tell me, right? They want more affordable housing. And I don't see how putting a tax on principal residences is going to make more affordable housing. The reason that we don't have affordable housing is because we're not building enough of it. We need to build more of it. And so if you had a plan that said, we're actually going to be able to build the 1.5 million homes that Doug Ford says we need to build, which we're not on anywhere close to being on track to building. But if we actually had a plan of how to build 1.5 million homes and that required some amount of public subsidization to do it, then I would say, well, how are we going to finance that? Are we going to finance that by looking at other creative ways to tax, let's say, investment properties, for example? That might be something that we should be interested to look at. But if we're talking about principal residence exemption, I mean, the problem in our real estate sector, I would argue, has not been created by people getting shelter, by people wanting to have their own home. It's been because we're not building enough homes and because they're competing with investors in the market. So we got to solve those problems. And tax can be part of that solution, but I don't think you're going to solve the problem on the principal home by making the principal home more expensive.
Sheldon, can I get this graphic up, top of page 2? Alan Lanthier from the Financial Post, who recently wrote, not that recently actually, but who wrote a few years ago, a recent report in Canadian Business estimated that Canada's 25 wealthiest families have a net worth of close to $200 billion, an average of $8 billion per family. Meanwhile, 15% of lower-income Canadian families have a net worth of less than $500. So, to help address this gap, should we be asking Canada's wealthiest to pay more taxes? In addition to numerous annual taxes and levies, they already face capital gains tax on death. But what if taxation on death can be avoided? Okay, Birute, start us off on that. Can taxation on death be avoided?
So Canada has a unique rule that where a taxpayer dies, there's a deemed disposition of all their wealth, well, capital assets primarily, which was mentioned already. And this includes not only their Canadian assets, but also their assets abroad. And Canada is a country of immigrants. And I have so many clients who have real estate in other countries, and they don't realize that if they pass away, even that foreign real estate will be subject to the Canadian capital gains tax. Now, there are exemptions, if they can be called exemptions. That's a rollover to a spouse or a spousal trust. So that's the only time when a deemed disposition on death does not result in tax. In all other cases, yes, tax applies to that wealth. Now, can it be avoided? Well, if you structure your assets during your life in a way that you don't own that wealth at the date of death, then your tax is minimized.
And that's legal tax avoidance.
Well, it is a tax planning, certainly.
Tax planning, okay.
And at best, it's tax deferral. There is no such thing as complete tax avoidance.
Okay. Tyler, in terms of the appropriateness of tax planning and tax avoidance, how does this sound to you?
So this is an area that actually requires a lot more study and analysis because there are huge issues here, and it's very, and you know, Alan and I, it's funny, Alan and I have disagreed on many things, but he points at a really important issue in that piece, and that is that we allow very creative tax structures and very creative tax planning to be able to avoid taxes, and on a certain level that is legal and appropriate, but it's whether or not you are entering into sophisticated planning that the average person, in absence of having access to those professional resources, would be able to do themselves. And this is actually where there's been a lot of effort, both by the federal government in the last couple of years, but also by a lot of governments around the world, to try to create stronger rules to anticipate these structures and to basically say that they're offside from the beginning. Now, whether that would capture this kind of situation that Alan has laid out, not sure. But the point being, we could actually generate a far greater share of public revenue just by simply better implementing the spirit of the Income Tax Act on its own.
Graham, let me follow up with you in this regard. We're not talking about tax evasion here, which is illegal. We're talking about legal tax avoidance, trying to legally pay as little as possible. This is a great cottage industry in Canada. Should we be discouraging this in order to have more money come into the Treasury to pay for the things, the services that Canadians want?
Well, it gets at an important point, which is that we can impose very complex new tax structures, and we can bring into being new tax laws. We can try to do things like wealth taxes. But probably the easier way to bring in more revenue to pay for the services we want is to enforce the laws that we have on the books better. So, for example, CRA invested fairly heavily in the last few years in enforcement, and that appears to have paid, at least anecdotally, appears to have paid huge dividends in terms of the amount of tax being brought in.
It always does. Yeah. Every Minister of Finance I've ever interviewed, if they send a few more auditors out there, they always get more money coming in.
Yeah, so that's probably step one. And then step two would be closing loopholes, like some of the ones that are used, some of the more egregious ones used in tax planning. So rather than creating new kinds of structures like wealth taxes or complex new inheritance taxes, just doing things like closing loopholes, like, for example, I think, what's it called, estate freezes, which Barute could probably speak to. Ways of transferring wealth between generations without having it seen by and taxed by the state in the way that ordinary people do. These are the kinds of things that you do if you're worth hundreds of millions or billions of dollars, that really is not accessible to ordinary people. And we have to ask whether that's fair and whether we should close those loopholes.
Is that fair, and should we close those loopholes? He said I had to ask.
Right. Well, let's look at it. So what is an estate freeze? So an estate freeze is a structure that allows to transfer the future growth on your wealth to be earned by other individuals, so your family members, for example, or perhaps your employees. If you're an incorporated business, you can give shares of that will hold the future growth in your company to your employees. Now, who uses estate freezes? So estate freezes are often utilized by small businesses who want to allow their families to retain that small business in the family. Now, if you prevented estate freezes from being available, those families may not be able to continue the business within the family after the original founder of the business passes away. Only 40% of all small businesses in Canada actually are continued by the next generation. That's a fairly small percentage, I would say. Well, relatively small percentage. And then that percentage decreases to when we look at further generations. Now, if that family had to find the cash to pay tax on the death of their father, for example, when that value became taxable on death, that problem of continuing the business would be so much greater, because not only would they have to want to continue the business, but they would also have to find the money to be able to continue the business. So I think that estate freezes are actually still a very good option.
You mind if I seek a second opinion on this?
Absolutely.
Alison, what's your view?
Well, look, I don't think that it's possible to think about tax without thinking about when the law says that this is taxable, then the taxpayer is going to say, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do something else so I don't face the tax. So this is an inherent problem with building a tax system. You're going to write a rule, and then most people are going to follow the rule. And they will follow the rule if they think the rule is going to be enforced against them, and if they, generally speaking, people sort of voluntarily cooperate with the tax system. Now, the more sophisticated your plan gets, the more possible some people are going to not have to follow the rule. They'll go around that rule. That's not something you can stop. The taxpayer is going to try not to pay the tax. So the question is this egregious? So on the scale of egregious from a state freeze to, sort of Loblaws as a bank, I think, there's a big gulf here. And I think there's an obscurity gulf as well. And that's the one that worries me.
What does that mean?
Well, so your average taxpayer does not understand what an estate freeze is. So it sounds bad and it sounds scary and it sounds like, oh, that sounds like tax avoidance. We really should shut that down. But then if you start digging into the details and looking at it, they might say, oh, okay, well, maybe there are reasons that we haven't shut that down. This is not a new strategy. This is not something they came up with last year. But how many taxpayers are watching the Supreme Court when the Supreme Court has to decide whether some convoluted scheme that some giant company has cooked up for years, with a bunch of lawyers, how many taxpayers are watching that and saying, oh, wait a minute, I don't like that is the outcome here. I don't like that there are all these other things that I don't understand in the tax system. And so this obscurity gap, makes my job really hard, right? Because I don't want to defend an estate freeze. I don't care about the estate freeze. But I do think that there are very structural problems in the Income Tax Act. And some of those, if I started telling you about them, you would just yawn. You would say, I don't care about interest deductibility. And
I would never yawn when you talk.
After a while, you might.
But one of the things that emerges from this conversation is that it doesn't sound like whatever new thing you want to do is going to be problem-free. Everything you want to do is going to create some other problem. So, Tyler, what should we do?
Well, actually, just to pick up on Allison's point, because I think there's a really important thing there. One of the most important things that I think has happened in the tax system in the last number of years, just happened in this budget, in the last federal budget. It's called the modernization of the general anti-avoidance rule. And this is super important because it gets at the issue that Allison just raised, which is it used to be you had to basically, if CRA found something that was inappropriate, that was excessive tax avoidance and aggressive tax planning, it had to go to the court and basically prove that was the intent, that there was an obvious attempt to try to flout the spirit of the Tax Act, the Income Tax Act. Now, under the proposed modernized general anti-avoidance rule, we would say you have to prove that there is a valid economic substance to this transaction that you want to do, and that the tax value of that doesn't outweigh all of the other attributes that you're proposing to get. And that's important because it actually makes it puts the burden of proof of the fairness of the tax system on those who are actually trying to use it for tax planning purposes. That is one of the most important things that we could do.
Graham, what would you do?
I think that so Tyler's raises an important point. That's a fundamental change to the tax system, and I think it's a major contribution. If we look at what this government has managed to do over the last 8 or 9 years, I guess it's 8 years that they've been in power, there have been some minor changes to the way that they structure taxes, but by and large they've left the tax system alone. They haven't done any major structural reforms to it. And I think that's probably the best we can hope for with the kinds of federal governments that we get these days, which are often minority governments. They don't have a lot of political capital to spend on major reforms to the tax system. So incremental steps, closing loopholes, these kinds of fixes are. We already have a very progressive income tax system. And the question is, what are we going to do to pay for these, the expansion of services and the reduction in the ratio of workers to retirees in the future? And it's going to be incremental steps, I think, is the best we can hope for.
Anybody suggesting the government should just spend less, therefore it doesn't need to tax more? No, okay. Can I just, in our last seconds here?
Well, that's the French side.
Well, we're bilingual on this place here. Okay, yes. Alison Christian's brought this in. She does love tax law.
I do.
And we love having her on this program. Mr. Director, can I get a shot of everybody here? So I can thank everyone for coming into TVO tonight, and Tyler, and you in the nation's capital as well, and joining our little love fest about tax law here on the agenda tonight. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
If you want to get people of a certain age hot under the collar, just say, baby boomers didn't pay their fair share of taxes. Paul Kershaw recently did that, and he got an earful But he stands firmly by his view, having put a good deal of work into comparing the circumstances of varying generations. Paul Kershaw is founder of Generation Squeeze, which calls itself a, quote, think and change tank. Not just a think tank, a think and change tank. He's a professor of public policy at the University of British Columbia, co-hosts the podcast Hard Truths, and he joins us now here in the studio. Great to see you again.
Thanks so much for having me back.
Not at all. Let's start with something that, I think you might have written this in the Globe and Mail. Here we go. Shelton, put this up if you would. Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland emphasized the need for fiscal restraint in her recent budget, but that's not what she delivered in a budget which includes $132 billion in deficit spending over the next 5 years. This adds about $6,100 in government debt for every Canadian under age 45, most of which pays for spending used by the aging population. Okay, explain that last part to us, the notion that a disproportionate share of the debts being currently incurred are going to be paid by younger people.
Yeah, and toward an aging population. I think that was the key point I was making in that part of the Globe and Mail article. So if we look in the fine print of the federal budget, which is what I make my business doing as a policy professor, you can see that old age security over the next 5 years is going to grow by a whopping $86 billion of new spending. Spending on the Canada Health Transfer is going to go up by about $50 billion. Around half of that is going to be used by the 19% of the population over 65. When you put those two things together, it comes to about $110 billion. And that means that of the $132 billion in deficit spending. We've probably lost everyone with my math exercise right now.
I'm impressed that you're keeping all these numbers very cogent, so good for you.
Of that $132 billion in deficit spending over the next 5 years, 84% of it, the vast, vast majority of it, will go to spending used by people that I love, like my mom, and all of the aging family members in our lives. The spending on that demographic in and of itself isn't the problem. The public finance that is giving rise to routine deficits, having a conversation about fiscal restraint, but not understanding what's making that impossible, that is creating a big intergenerational tension.
Doesn't your mother need that money?
Absolutely. My mom needs and deserves to have a financially secure, healthy retirement.
So what's the problem?
The problem is that on the watch of my mom's demographic and a baby boom demographic, we didn't have the hard conversation about what does it take to pay enough in taxes during your working years to cover the costs for retirement income and medical care you're going to later want to use. And here's how I know. So when baby boomers came of age in the mid-1970s, there were about 7 working age adults for every retiree. Today, there's 3.3. Now, that wouldn't have been a problem if we designed our tax system to say, oh, during your working lives, we're going to collect from you all the revenue you're going to need to prepay for what you'll later use. But that's not how Canada's policy works, with the exception of one very important policy, the Canada Pension Plan. In the mid-1990s, our governments recognized, this baby boomer bulge that we call, it's a real thing. It's going to pose some challenges. Prior to the 90s, we paid for our pensions and our medical care just as the country incurred costs. So when there was relatively few retirees relative to workers, you could keep taxes low because lots of workers, not a lot of people using retirement income and medical care when we're most fragile later in our lives. But in the 90s, people had, that's going to bankrupt the Canada Public Pension Plan. And they were right. So they actually increased in the mid-90s by 65% what workers had to pay for benefits they would later draw down. But we didn't. We didn't do that for medical care, and we didn't do that for old age security. And the provincial budget in 2023 in Ontario and the federal budget this year are really coming to reap those big challenges.
So we're still using a lot of services in the boomer generation and sending the bill to our kids.
That's exactly right. These are important policies, important services to use. An older demographic deserves them, but we haven't had the conversation with them saying, you didn't prepay enough for what you're now wanting to use. And unless we make some adaptations asking, especially an affluent component of the older demographic, to start contributing more, there is absolutely no way we are not going to leave unpaid bills to your kids and grandchildren.
Is that the same thing as saying boomers are not living within their means?
Well, that headline came about because when I started talking about the idea that boomers haven't paid enough taxes for what they want to use, I did get some vitriolic emails.
You don't say.
I did, and it started off with a bit of swearing. But when we move beyond the swearing, the line that the person said is, I've never taken a government handout. I live within my means. And I'm like, well, let me just show you what's happened on your watch in terms of government debt. And government debt, so boomers came of age in the mid-1970s as young adults when for every person under 45, there was about 10 grand in government debt. If you flash forward to today, there's over 50 grand. Now, there's some reasons why we should, massage those numbers, but it is safe to say that on the watch of baby boomers, government debt has tripled at the per capita level when compared to the past. And that is got to be a clear sign that, maybe we organize politics around earning our vote by saying, we're going to offer you more, but not having the hard conversation about how are we going to pay for that?
Well, okay, Canada's almost 156 years old. Haven't we always done that? The generation of today always uses services and sends the bill to the next generation down. Isn't that true?
That is true, but that's why the boomer bulge matters so much. The demographics here are the big challenge. The fact that in the mid-1970s, there were 7 working age adults for every retiree, and now there's barely 3. This is a really big demographic challenge because we didn't do what we did later in the 90s, where we said, oh, we're going to have a larger demographic of older people needing to draw services. And so we have to make sure they pay enough for what they're going to want to use. We never said that. And so if we'd had the same number of workers relative to retirees every decade, there'd be no problem whatsoever. But we call them a baby boom for a reason. It's not as if we're surprised by the fact that this large group of people is working its way through their life cycle. And so we didn't prepare. And I'm not out here to be mean about that. I'm certainly not trying to shame an older demographic. I'm wanting to invite my mom and all the moms and dads and grandparents out there to say, you want things to be better for your kids and grandchildren. That's not the legacy that's actually being left in a whole range of ways, whether it's public finance or housing or climate change, but there's still time.
Let's pick up on housing. Sheldon, top of page 2. Can you bring up this chart, please? This is net wealth in housing in Canada. And for those who are listening on podcast, we'll just describe, we're looking at a chart here. It's got 4 bars. And if you go back to 1977, the amount of wealth that those under 45 and those over 55 had in their homes, about the same, essentially the same. If you flash forward, as Paul likes to say, to 2019, you find a huge gap. Those over 55 now have 58% of their income in their principal residence, whereas those under 45 make up only 21% of it. It is a huge gap.
Yeah, can I just refine that a little bit?
Please.
So, in other words, of all the housing wealth that is out there today, about 60% of it is owned by those 55 and older. It used to be about 40%. And back in the day, you had a younger demographic having about a third of the housing wealth. Now they have barely 20%.
How did that happen?
Exactly. So our earlier conversation was about public finance. How are governments investing between young and old alike? And I can share more details about that as we go along. But you might think it's totally fine to ask a younger demographic to contribute more now to today's aging population if that aging population was really financially vulnerable and the young demographic was doing fabulously well.
But that's not the case.
It is exactly the opposite. And your bar graphs help to show that. And I think one of the simplest ways to show that the economy doesn't reward hard work for today's young people like it used to is to think about home prices, which we all know, especially in Ontario, has done this. Earnings, done this. What does that mean? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, if you were a homeowner, if you were a nurse or a waitress or a bus driver back in the late 70s or early 80s and you bought a home in Toronto or Hamilton, as a regular person could do, the fact that home prices have done this is fabulous. I'm in this. I've been a homeowner in Metro Vancouver for the last 20 years. I gained $1 million in just the last 4 years alone. There are many people in Toronto and Hamilton and in London and so on who can make that same observation about gaining housing wealth. So that's increased affluence for an older demographic, pushed many sort of middle-class people into the more affluent categories. But their kids, the exact opposite happened. Their kids might have better jobs, more education, but their jobs can't earn incomes that keep pace. And so whereas it used to take 5 years of full-time work to save a 20% down payment on an average priced home, across the country, in this province, even in Toronto, it now takes 17 years across the country. 22 is the average in Ontario, and a whopping, soul-destroying 27 years in the Greater Toronto area.
So if you're in, it's great. If you're not in, forget it.
It is, but it's not just forget it. Just think about what that means in terms of your sense of almost self-esteem. Like, to some degree, managing to secure housing, whether as an owner or as a renter, is something that one sort of says, like, yeah, an adult should be able to do that. And right now, our economy is making it so challenging for generations of young adults and newcomers of any age to actually make a go of it.
Every generation, though, thinks it's hard done by. Do you think boomers understand that if you look at it objectively, they're not so hard done by as a group?
Yeah, I think that that's one of the challenges of the generation squeeze work. When we started, we were more oriented around trying to bust myths for younger people. You're not struggling because you drink too many lattes or eat too much avocado toast or you have that cell phone. We were showing that the economy simply isn't rewarding hard work like it used to. I think I think the national debate and the Ontario debate is actually more willing to acknowledge that. What we're less likely to acknowledge is actually what's harming hard work paying off for younger people has benefited an older demographic. So that's why the articles I've been writing more recently for Generation Squeeze and in the Globe and Mail are trying to probe a little to my mom's demographic, to the retiring baby boomers. I know it's a moment of fragility, especially biologically. People are getting older, and that it's a biological reality that we're going to experience more vulnerability. But I think for too long we thought the biological fragility goes hand in hand with an economic fragility. But the data are clear. Those over 65 have the lowest rates of poverty of any age group in the country, and they have by far the most wealth and more wealth than previous groups of retirees. And so that is what I need in today's older demographic to heed the tagline of the Scotiabank: you're richer than you think.
So what do you want to do about this?
Well, there's some policy changes that we desperately need.
For example?
But before I can get to the policy changes, so there are policy changes. We are going to need to say to an older demographic, those of you who are affluent, how can you contribute more to the cost of your generation's medical care and old age security?
Define affluence.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. That's what I was going to actually say. But what we need to do before that is sort of have a cultural conversation about who is affluent. So let me start there, because I think that's the more provocative piece. We've done some polling recently where we were trying to probe Canadians' understanding of who's economically at risk, who's affluent. And we started with a scenario of, imagine a widow with an income of just $25,000, has her barely over the guaranteed income supplement living, so really close to low income. Rich or poor? Oh, that sounds poor. She lives in a home that she owns outright, and it's worth $1 million. People are not so sure now. Imagine the home's $2 million, which is not uncommon in the Toronto area or Hamilton area. And like, oh no, that person's rich. Then we swap it around and say, imagine a young lawyer making $200,000. It puts them in the top few percent of income earners in this country. Oh, definitely affluent. They're renting. And suddenly, oh no, that person is less affluent than the widow with 25 grand who owns outright a home worth $2 million. I think we need to be recognizing that an older demographic might not view itself as Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk, but the relative affluence and security that comes with secure housing is something that a younger demographic is feeling really crowded out of, and they're being jeopardized by it.
How do we make policy if we can't agree on what constitutes affluence?
Well, that's why shows like yours are so important. So I guess we need to fund the TVO and get you broadcasting more and more from coast to coast so we can have these more in-depth conversations.
That is not why we had you come on here, but I don't mind you saying it.
It's worthwhile.
But I actually didn't mean it to be a facetious question. If we can't agree on, if you're trying to shake money out of a tree and you want to get it from affluent people, and we can't agree on what constitutes affluence, how do we do it?
Yeah. You know, I pride myself as a professor who's not only good with the data, but also someone who's devoted a lot of time to comms, and I wish that, or communications, I should say. I think this is a challenge. I think it's going to involve some important storytelling and observations, and I tend not to focus a lot on homelessness, but let me bring a story from British Columbia. Your listeners might have seen recently that we had police officers and garbage trucks go down one of our streets in the poorest neighborhood in the country. And we were removing the tents that people were using to sleep on the sidewalks, because this is the part of the population that is most harmed by housing unaffordability and literally do not have a actual structure to sleep in under other than a tent at night. And I find myself at this stage struggling to figure out, why is this happening when in that very same city we have created more housing wealth there than perhaps anywhere else on the planet. And you could say much the same thing about the GTA and the level of homelessness that you experience here in Ontario in its prime, in our city centre. And so I think to some degree, there's going to, you might be a left of center person and say, I want to protect those who are vulnerable and I'm going to care for them. You might be those who are like, I don't buy that argument. And it's like, I want to be more self-serving. Like, if we lock out an entire generation of younger people who then are out, you lock out the rich lawyer from home ownership and they're competing for the rental that the middle class would have used in the past. The middle class go and find the rental that the blue collar worker would have had in the past. The blue collar now goes use the social housing and the social housing isn't available for those on the street. Like, it trickles down in an incredibly harmful way, or cascades, I should say, not trickles. But that can create a great deal of strife. I know people right now on the Toronto subway are feeling unsafe because of increased levels of violence. You can see that increased level of violence and unpredictability in a range of places. That is because our economy is not rewarding hard work for a younger demographic, newcomers of any age. And so when we have less economic security, you are going to get more crime, more ill health, more friction between groups. And let me take it back to where we started. I just said that our current system of old age security and medical care depends on the largesse, the kindness, the generosity of a younger demographic to pay more in taxes for their aging parents and loved ones than those aging parents and loved ones had to do, and take on larger deficits at the same time. If we're going to ask that of a younger demographic, it's likely only to be sustained if that older demographic says, I understand on my watch, maybe the legacy isn't entirely what I meant to leave.
Can I tell you a political reality, though, which I don't have to tell you because you know it already?
But tell me so that we can lament it.
Let's have it out anyway. Older people vote, younger people don't. Look at politicians respond to political pressure. Older people vote, younger people don't. What are you going to do about that?
Crawl under your table and cry?
I don't think that's going to help.
That's not an option. Okay, so no, there's two ways. So if you go to the Gen Squeeze website, gensqueeze.ca, you'll see one of the things we're interested in is rejuvenating democracy. And so as we tell hard truths to an older demographic, we also tell hard truths to a younger demographic. Politics responds to those who organize and show up. We are less likely to use our organizing to show up at the ballot box. It is no surprise that politics is then slow to acknowledge these intergenerational tensions. I would say Gen Squeeze could be judged a failure, to be honest, over the last decade at not lighting enough of a fire under a younger demographic to get us more mobilized in using our voter power. So to address that potential failure, I do find myself more and more reaching out to an older demographic, especially grandmothers.
Because they care about their grandkids.
And they vote. And so I think right now, there's many an older person who's like, wow, I find myself worried that my kids are not able to provide, the housing security for my grandchildren that I was hoping. I kind of wish they would actually live closer to me than they are, let alone like having access to any kind of rental or with a yard, et cetera. And so I think there's a moment where within families, we can ask our grandparents to start saying, this isn't quite, something is changing, and use that challenge around the family table at Thanksgiving or whatever our next intergenerational family moment will be, to then say, and what does that mean for our politics? Because we've socialized an older demographic to say, I'm going to vote for parties based on what more they're going to do for my medical care and my retirement income. We need to socialize those grandparents to say, that matters, but not at the expense of the childcare and education and post-secondary and supports for employment insurance that my kids and grandchildren are going to need as well.
Can that be done?
Yeah, because this is not your typical class analysis. I am not here as Tommy Douglas saying a story about all the mice who are haplessly churning the cream that a bunch of fat, rich, black cats take and skim off for themselves. That's sort of, cats don't like mice. They eat mice. There's a tension there that's sort of innate. But generations love one another. So I get to start, and I know this is going to sound hopelessly naive in some way, I get to start from a place of love. That love exists around the family table. How can we bring that to the world of politics? Now, I have some younger people like, Paul, love, set that aside, take the gloves off, and start saying to boomers, you are leaving problems. And I think that we're trying to find the right balance. You're referring to the article in the Globe and Mail where, I took the gloves off a little more to attract that attention. But at the end of the day, there's a love between generations that I think might be the only factor that can really help us disrupt our systems and set us on a better path. Because generational unfairness is an underlying disease. We don't talk about the underlying disease. More often we talk about the symptoms, whether it's climate change, or housing wealth inequality and unaffordability, or the large deficits in public finance and underinvestment in a younger demographic. Those are all symptoms of this generational unfairness as the underlying disease. We need to turn our attention to that, because if we vaccinate that underlying disease, we can preserve what Canadians hold to be sacred: a healthy childhood, an affordable home, a healthy home, and a healthy planet.
My experience in politics is that it does not respond all that well to love, but it really does to fear and hate. And maybe what you need is a good old-fashioned generation war to make the kind of progress that you want to make. I'm not advocating it, but I say, I've noticed over the years that tends to be what politics responds to. What do you think?
I hope not, because I think that if that's the necessary step by which to achieve a reorganizing of our policy systems, then it will do a decent amount of damage that I would love to avoid. There is a growing discontent amongst the younger demographic, but they will all start with, I want to protect my parents and grandparents. And so I think now is the time to say to parents and grandparents, you've spent your decades thinking that you're protecting your kids and grandchildren, and it must really, can I say this, piss you off to have a prof come and an organization like Gen Suisse come and say, it didn't work out as well as you'd like. But don't see that as our pitting generations against one another or are trying to shame you. Instead, look at it as there's a problem that we together can solve.
Time to take one for the team.
Time to acknowledge that you value paying for what you use. And all we're asking right now is to pay for what you're using. Younger demographics can figure out to deal with the other challenges they're facing.
Paul, you always give us so much to think about when you visit our program, which is why we like to have you on. That is Paul Kershaw, the Associate Professor at the University of British Columbia and founder of Generation Squeeze. Not just a think tank, but a think and change tank, promoting well-being for all generations. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
And that is the agenda for Wednesday, April 26, 2023. The provincial government announced recently it intends to move the Ontario Science Centre to Ontario Place, which it had previously announced would be redesigned to host a giant, privately owned and operated spa. Tomorrow, J.N. Jagannathan gets perspectives from both sides on that plan. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at TVO.org. And J.N., we'll see you here tomorrow.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.